Hello.
Good morning. I welcome you to the Health Tech Next Gen Big Data Health 360 Big Words. And it's my great privilege, honor, and a matter of personal joy to open up the conference and start getting the ball rolling on the conversations about big data and analytics. My name is Shadab Khanwal. I am the Executive Director for Research in Quality, Community Benefit. Actually, it's a portfolio which serves the corporate functions of community benefit research, health policy, international health, hospitals quality and care delivery excellence at Kaiser Permanente. How many of you are familiar with the word Kaiser Permanente? Okay, so I am so glad and honored that you have considered to be part of this discussion. I have a very distinguished panel on which we will invite and engage in having a very meaningful discussion about big data and more specifically, managing big data in cloud. So there are two, distinct areas that we're going to try to bring them together. One is the big data. You heard about it. How big is the big data? We want to talk about that. And then, is there a big data? We want to talk about that. And then, what's the realm of possibility for big data in the cloud? And so we're going to have some discussions like around that kind of thing. I want to suggest that let's make it like an interactive session. And although I have an expert panelist sitting on, to respond to your queries, make yourself be a participant and an interactive participant by raising your hand, introducing yourself, and then we'll get an opportunity to do a conversation. So the way we're going to start the conversation is I'm going to invite my distinguished panelists to introduce themselves to the organization that they belong to and what attracts them to talk about big data as well as big data in cloud, and how does their relevant expertise or their relevant company offering basically substantiates their presence here. I just want to do a disclaimer. Kaiser Permanente as a company do not endorse any of these, but I just have to make sure that you understand that part also. So I will start the conversation with so I'm going to go from Bill all the way Anup and Bala and Anup in that way to kind of see if they can take the mic and introduce themselves and then basically see what interests them to be here.
Hi, so I'm Bill Schwarzo. I am the CTO within EMC Consulting, EMC Global Service Consulting Organization. So my job is I basically spend all of my time talking to and working with customers trying to figure out where and how to start. I love how you started the conference off by talking about how we are still in the early stages of big data. And we have been for the last 2 years, and by golly, it looks like we're still going to be there probably 2 years from now. And it's disappointing because we have the conversation wrong. We come in and talk to organizations, and I see this when I walk. I talk to customers in Kansas City and San Antonio and Columbus and Chicago and Minneapolis and Cincinnati and Atlanta, every place outside of Silicon Valley. And they all think the conversation's around technology, and they're confused, and they don't know what to do. And the sands are ever shifting, and we are guilty here in this area here of confusing the customers who actually would spend money on our technology because we framed the conversation wrong. And so the points I'm going to be making today are, I think the conversation we're having is the wrong conversation. No doubt the technology is amazing. You can do unbelievable stuff with it. But we're having the wrong conversation with our potential customers and clients who can take advantage of this. And so we're going to talk about that today.
Thank you, Bill.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Bala Venkatram. I am part of the products team at Cloudera. I've been at Cloudera since the early days of Cloudera. I also lead the customer advocacy function at Cloudera, so that means working with customers, understanding the requirements to really figure out what kind of data platform we need to build for the next decade. So in my view, I think Hadoop is reaching the prime time stage, right? Like a few years back, still experimental, people are kicking the tires, but we're starting to see real, actual, meaningful use cases. People know what to do with this platform, how to extract value out of the platform. Agreed, I think there's a lot of learning and retooling which needs to happen, and some customers are further ahead than the rest. And I think the onus is on vendors like Cloudera to up the ante and make the mainstream sort of enterprise customers successful on the platform. So as I was kind of preparing for this platform, for this panel, I was just kind of thinking about a use case which is kind of relevant to big data and the cloud from one of our customer base. So last year I was at the Hadoop World in New York, and I was just at Woodbridge. I was kind of like talking to research scientists at one of the biggest pharma companies in the world, and he kind of explained to me a fascinating use case of Hadoop. So it so happened that they collect a ton of information for any of their processes, for their manufacturing processes, but prior to something like Hadoop, they didn't have a means to analyze it. So this research scientist said, okay, let me kind of do something with Hadoop. Let me look at this time series data to see, can I sort of improve the yield on these processes? It so happened that the company had some free AWS credits. Amazon had just given it to them. So he said, okay, let me go to AWS, pick up a Hadoop cluster, load it up with this time series data, which was like the last 10 to 12 years of data. Let me look for time patterns to see like if there are certain triggers I can identify which can improve the yield of the process. So he did all the work on his own, and I think he was effectively able to build a model which showed that they could improve the process by like 1 to 3%, which would result in 60 million saving for that one particular process. So he went back to the management team and said, okay, this is the work I've done over the last 3 months. This is the impact. Immediately the management turned around and said, this is great. We need to do this across all the processes. And they have like hundreds of those processes. So then I think when they kind of looked at the use case and the power of big data, the entire organization is rallying behind it. And we are now really going to have a Hadoop cluster in-house, bring all of this data, analyze across these processes, and the impact, just the sheer impact on the company is going to be so much meaningful, right? Not only in terms of efficiency, but also in terms of cost savings. So I think that's a concrete example in terms of like how some forward-looking organizations are leveraging both the power of the cloud and big data to have them.
Thank you. Please.
So my name is Anup Dawar. I look after the MapR distribution for Apache Hadoop and MapR. MapR is a Forrester recognized technology leader in Apache distributions. We have over 500 customers, and we have hundreds of customers today doing production Hadoop in cloud. So Google Compute, the guys who started this whole thing, recommend MapR as a platform to run on Google Compute. And Amazon has MapR as the only distribution other than Apache Hadoop for NoSQL as well as big data processing on their EMR clusters. So my interest here is really to focus back to the topic at hand. You know, big data is a huge topic. We can spend days and days here going through a lot of interesting elements. So my hope today is to give you more information about how to successfully run production grade Hadoop in cloud to derive business value.
Oh, that's wonderful. According to IBM, we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. So much that 90% of that data in the world has not been created from the last 2 years. And when John Maddison is going to come, he's going to talk multiples of that kind of conversation. So I do want to welcome him into the conversation. He's going to run the hi John. He's going to be doing the 12 o'clock big data power panel. So Dr. Maddison is CMIO for Kaiser Permanente, so I wanted to welcome you also. And when he's going to talk about how the quintillion bytes of data are impacting, you will start realizing that the dynamics of healthcare environment is so rapidly changing. My question to the panelists would be that we have two distinct elements here. One is cloud computing and one is big data. How do you think that cloud computing is an enabler for advanced analytics? number one, and then with big data analytics as a service, is there a possibility to use cloud?
So let me start off first. I think the definition of the cloud is fairly broad, right? Like there are various kinds of cloud, and the way we sort of look at it at Cloudera is just do a 2x2 matrix of like customer and the vendor, who's hosting it, and who's managing it. We come up with like multiple choices. So on the far left, you have like customers would say, let me build a cloud internally, let me manage it, right? So it could be like the private cloud, the OpenStack, and they want to run Hadoop or that kind of infrastructure. If you go further along, customers might say, I want to have a managed service provider who actually like maintains the infrastructure for me, but I still manage the Hadoop cluster for me, right? So the infrastructure is managed by the managed service provider. Then you go further along and say, okay, let it be managed by a vendor like AWS or Rackspace. So they manage the infrastructure with the key system to the customer. And then to the far right, you have completely as a service, where Hadoop is as a service. We have services being offered by EMR or companies like Qbol, which is really turnkey. So it really depends on where the customer falls and in the spectrum and what do they really like to do. In some cases, what I've seen is, especially in financial services and healthcare, they would like to really own the infrastructure and manage it and have tabs on who's getting access to it. In that case, they are building the infrastructure from the scratch. In other cases, like you see many startups who are building their technologies up in the cloud, all the data is generated in the cloud. In that case, like having something just inside the public cloud and having the analytics run where the data is generated, I think that's the key. Where you want to sort of do the analytics, where the data is generated, because when you're sort of talking about data in petabytes, volume of data is too much to just move from the one place to another.
Wait, anybody wants to add a comment to that?
Yeah, sure. So the interesting thing about the cloud, from my perspective, is agility. It allows me to use the right process and procedures at the right time to solve the right problem. Before I joined EMC, I did a startup here in Silicon Valley. Everybody's supposed to do at least one or two of those. And accordingly, I've got the scars on my back and the credit card bills to show how well it went. So, but what we loved about it was as a startup, you mentioned we could start in the cloud. All our data was in the cloud, all the compute was in the cloud. We turned a capital expense into a line item, right? And we would pay as we used. So I'm seeing organizations across the country using that agility where they're doing prototyping and skunkworks on a public cloud, grabbing a bunch of data. Much of it is already on the cloud, and some of it's not. They're doing the work there, and then once they've proven out, they have proved. In some cases, they don't prove it out, right? They don't prove out the use case. They're done. They've not incurred a huge capital cost. But when they do prove it out, and they've shown the ROI, they've proven out the lift they can achieve, then they can have the option of, well, do I bring it in-house? Do I build it in-prem? Do I go stay hybrid? Do I go public? It's about agility, right? I can apply the right amount of resources to prove something out before I have to spend a huge amount of money unknowing what that ROI might be.
Yeah, so on that front actually, so I completely agree with that. Elasticity and the flexibility of the cloud that brings to the big data is really important. Because just imagine, let's say you have you know what you're doing with Hadoop, right? I think let's take that as an assumption for a second, which I know broadly may not be true. But if you want to combine big data and cloud, you have to start somewhere. So let's say case one, you know what you're doing with Hadoop, but there are so many new technologies and use cases coming up. And you don't want to go muck with your production cluster to bring all these new technologies every day, right? Because your big data is new, most people who are running big data clusters are new, and you want to keep it production to meet your SLAs. Cloud is a wonderful way to do that. Take some of your data, move it to the cloud in a private, secure manner, run your tests, bring all sorts of other applications and tools that we need. There's a new Spark app, put it on there. There's a new MySQL app, put it on there, right? And try it out. Works, great. Bring it back in-house now. You have experience. You know what are the right things to do to make it production ready. Right? So absolutely, that's one place where big data and cloud marry really well together. But I think let's zoom out. If you have, what is your IT strategy? If your IT strategy is to go cloud, then your big data belongs in cloud over the long term. If your IT strategy is a hybrid, then you have to seriously think about it, like Bala said, because if the data is coming into the cloud, let's say you're doing internet of things, sensor applications. Right? And now the sensors are all over the world. So they're not coming necessarily to your private cloud and say you're going to a public cloud. Also, that's where the data is. So that's where your Hadoop needs to be.
So our world is moving in analytics from a business intelligence or reporting infrastructures towards predictive, somewhat prescriptive, and I would submit we want to make it persuasive analytics where we are able to predict and make change behaviors, whether it be a consumer behavior, whether it be a patient or a physician behavior. So we have seen new architectures that combine the best of both the data and the content world, and then we have new technologies, that create highly usable applications, and on top of them to address the business problems. My question would be that what business transformation potential of big data is in the cloud, and how initiatives like these, like putting it in the cloud, needs to be done with what platform or what mechanism do you suggest to our audience that they should adopt from an IT strategy perspective you talked about, but are there any tangible mechanisms that you can suggest?
I think my take is I think other members in the panel go to is just the agility. If you really want to experience the power of Hadoop, you need to have the cluster in the first place, right? You can't have one node cluster. You need to have a meaningful number of nodes in cluster. And many times in IT organization, the longest pole is hardware procurement. Right? It's funny, but that tends to be the long pole. They have to go through a lot of hoops to just acquire hardware and set it up. But you could just go to AWS and you can spin up like a 100-node cluster in 20 minutes. Right? So if you really want to experience the power of Hadoop, that's the fastest way to go. And that's why if you really want to prove it to your organization that this is the real stuff. If you want to do things like predictive analytics, now what is predictive analytics? It's really applying lots of data to really simple algorithms. I think Google has shown the world that you don't need complex algorithms. If you have simple algorithms, you have a lot of data, you can actually get great insights from it. But you need a way to really crunch through a lot of data. So the cloud provides you a perfect conduit to make that happen. And a lot of organizations are increasingly looking at it. And I think AWS is doing a great job. I was at the AWS Summit last week. And the kind of portfolio they've built in the products, this is amazing. It just makes the bar to really start up a Hadoop cluster in the cloud, it's so much lower there. So I would think that's the fastest on-ramp to get started with Hadoop, play around with Hadoop, see the power of Hadoop. And at some point along, you might say, you know what, this is tangible, this is real, and you might make a call whether you want to bring the cluster in-house and manage a full-fledged cluster within you.
There's probably nothing more frustrating to a business to have an idea and want to pursue an idea, and it takes you 4, 6, 8 weeks to get the whole environment set up. Right? And in fact, in some cases, the idea or the opportunity is passed by. We missed it. And to me, what's so powerful about the cloud is, what you're alluding to, is this self-provision environment. I have an idea, I can get an environment up literally the same thing. I can start testing this theory out. I can see if I can take advantage of this fleeting business opportunity that may be in front of me. So, this whole idea that you allow the business to self-provision environments to test their ideas and do it quickly is really, it's one of the game changers. Because how many businesses have been in a situation where an opportunity presents itself? Some market situation, some weather situation, some government change situation happens. They know they've got a window of 2 or 3, 4 weeks to take advantage of it, but they don't have a chance to act on it because by the time they get their environment turned on, ready to go, that opportunity's gone by.
So data is becoming more available. We know that we produce data in the social environments. We are a producer of data. Our enterprise data is going to grow by 800%, according to Gartner, from 2011 to 2015. And data analytics is moving from a batch to a real-time environment, right? So real-time environment is where we support our predictive analytics part of it. And one of the biggest problems in the cloud adaptation is basically the problem of moving the data from one place to another, more specifically to the cloud. What technologies or what strategies would you suggest to our audience, if they are considering moving those kind of high volume, big variety and big velocity kind of environments that they've already created or they're intending to create, that will create value for them? Because I think big data is all about velocity, variety, and volume, and our value proposition is in the value of it. So, any specific mechanisms or strategies you would suggest?
Yes, I can start with this one. So, a couple of things that I've seen. Firstly, let's look at what cloud and virtualization. I'm going to bring virtualization with a lot of cloud technologies under the cover use virtualization. What did they try to do? They said, you have fragmented resources. Your needs are maybe 80 servers, but you have 160 servers. So let's virtualize it and let's use all the 180 servers effectively and do more, or let's just get 80 servers and virtualize it. And that's what cloud efficiency brings to the table. What does big data do? Big data at its core does the reverse. Right? It says maximize your storage, and I'll use my compute to its max extent possible on every node because I'm going to run fancy analytics on it.
Yeah.
Right? So there is an inherent sort of quote-unquote conflict, and because of that conflict, people usually think that if you want performant SLA clusters, if you want predictive real-time analytics, then you run it in your own environment. If you want batch predictive analytics clusters where the SLA is a little more flexible, then you can run it in the cloud. Right? So I'm going to start with that premise. I've set it up, and I'm going to tell you now that it's untrue. Right? And why is it untrue? Because it's true if you are trying to do big data using cloud without understanding how the cloud underneath is being architected and used. But if you know how it's used, and if you know how it's architected, and you go to the right cloud vendor and you pick the right instances and you do all the right things in the back end, then you can create a performant SLA cluster inside cloud. But that needs sophistication. Now your technologist needs to know big data very well, and they need to know cloud internals very well. There are a lot of emerging sort of best practices that are coming out, which help you, piece through this complexity. But you can do big data in cloud with SLA and performance. You just need to go through a little bit more exercise. It's going to cost a little bit more as well. But then again, you have to zoom out and see what's your total cost of ownership. What would it cost you to get that agility, that business transformation, and the extra value if you were trying to do it on a private sector?
Will, you want to add to that?
I was just saying, coming back to the question in terms of moving the data between on-premise and the cloud, so we have various technologies to kind of do that. Like the Hadoop stack has got technologies like Scoop and Flume, so you can just scoop data from your existing Hadoop cluster and move it to cloud. And also at the HDFS level, there's work underway to have HDFS to S3 connectors, so you can just have a data flow to S3. And then Amazon recently announced the streaming sort of product called Kinesis, which you can have any of the sensors just stream data to your clusters in AWS, and then have the EMR cluster kind of spin up. But by far, the most easiest way if you want to move petabytes of data onto a cloud is FedEx. Right? Just take a disk price and FedEx it to AWS, and they'll rack and stack it, and you'll have the data there. Right? So yeah, moving petabytes of data it takes a while, and so I think that's where most enterprises take a step back and say, where should I really be doing the analytics? Where the data resides, or should I?
I think this, I like your example. The most important data movement tool that we had in my startup was FedEx, right, which drives it. So you kind of backward that it was. One of the things that's kind of manifests itself as you talk about data movement in the cloud and where it should reside, and whatever you decide now, you have the right answer a week or a month or a year from now. But we're seeing organizations adopt this concept called data lake. I'm not sure I like the term yet.
Will, can you say it again? Data
lake. This concept called a data lake. And the idea is that you create this this repository through federation, through virtualization, where your data is accessible to your business users, and they really don't care where the data is located. Now, you probably support that, but they don't care. And you have, so they are getting the data that they need in a timely enough manner depending on their business case. But you underneath there are using the right tools, a lot of tools that you mentioned, right, to figure out what is the right architecture that supports that. And it's an ever-changing requirement, too. Different things, different data sources are going to become more important. They need to be moved to an environment where I get at it more quickly. Some data I don't get at very occasionally, so if I federate that and I get to it in a slower manner, that's fine. But the idea of this data lake concept that provides a layer of abstraction for the business users who don't really care about this discussion. I mean, the technology people very, very much do. The business people don't. And a lot of the product names we rattle off here, you know, Scoop, Squeal, Point, Pig, whatever, whatever sort of barnyard noises come out next, right? They don't care about that. Yeah. They just want people to get at their data. So as a best practice, watch this concept called data lake. Right now, it's some of these terms as being, you know, a secure wall for everything, but eventually it will come down to a reality that we can really work off of and use.
So we started out calling it the data hub, so it becomes the most important, the nerve center of the organization.
Yeah. Yep.
So the lake is just, it flows everywhere. So when you call it the hub, everybody
yeah. So yeah, we used to call it, you know, many years ago, the data stationary, right? Just, you know, what do vendors do? We change the names of things so we confuse you, right? That way, just want to confuse you.
Well, I think the idea of data staging area is probably more relevant to everybody's understanding. And I guess what you're saying is that, you know, you partner with your business and owners and, you know, help them to determine how big data can be used to solve their business problem, because everything is about the business problem. I mean, you can, I was speaking with one of the data scientists here, I think Naveen sitting right here, he was talking about, you know, there are very small chunks of small data that create big data. And to solve the business problem, you have to have a fully engaged business partner who can spell out the business, you know, a problem that you're going to solve. One of the biggest problems in this in the industry is who owns that data. You know, when the data is stored or is in flight or is is created. Who owns that data? Do you have any perspectives, you know, about who owns the data?
So I think from a Hadoop perspective, it's still infrastructure. So IT kind of gets involved because like the Hadoop is being used by a cross-cutting group of business units. The most successful use cases are where there's a business champion, so they know exactly what they can do with the data. But having said that, like in most cases, it's the IT organization who's kind of managing the data, securing the data, and making it available as a service to the end business units.
Let me kind of go slightly off on a tangent, build on a point that you've raised, is the business users in this process aren't optional. We tend to think at times that, well, we'll in IT, we'll bring Hadoop in, we'll throw some data on it, we'll throw some data scientists at it, and magic stuff will happen, right? And it doesn't, right? It doesn't. And the business users have to be involved on day one. And here's the reason why. Here's the reason why. If you pick a business problem you want to go after, which, by the way, we recommend is how you start this whole big data journey. You pick a problem to go after. You know, maybe it's predictive maintenance, maybe it's customer churn or fraud, or whatever it might be, capacity planning, whatever it is. The business users, the stakeholders, they know three things that are important as you develop your big data and your cloud strategy. Number one, they know what decisions they're trying to make. Capture those. It's not an infinite set. Number two, they know what questions they're trying to ask and answer in support of that decision. By the way, big data doesn't change the questions, it changes the answers, right? And number three, the KPIs against which they're measuring success. And any of you folks who've read the book Moneyball, not watched the movie, but read the book Moneyball, know that it's all about finding those predictors, those metrics that are better predictors of performance. So you have to have the business users involved in day one because they give you those three things, and they're going to tell you, as a data scientist, now if I know what decisions you're going to have to make, I know what kind of models I got to build. If I know what kind of questions you're asking, I know what different kind of data sources may or may not be important to that.
And then the whole KPI process about how do I tease out the questions and the data to find metrics that are better predictors. You have to have them involved in day one.
So the question is really interesting, right? Because who owns the data? Now, and let's say it's a big organization with multiple departments. Let's say you have compliance issues. Let's say you have business ownership issues around data. You can't all of a sudden say, now that I have a data lake or a data hub, you know, it's party for everyone. All the data comes in and everybody is able to see that data. So I define ownership with respect to controls, right? And so now you start talking about controls. So how are you going to manage millions of files that are sitting in your Hadoop? I'm just going to use Hadoop, not Data Hub or Data Lake for now. Let's let the marketing pick it up and then we'll use whatever we want. But you have this, and what are you going to do now? Right? So you can't on every file, millions or not millions, even billions of files in some of our customers' cases, go and say this file is owned by this guy, and he can do these things, and he can only access these columns, right? And business users care about this because it's fine to involve a business user. In fact, it's actually the first step. But the IT has to make sure that we don't blow the fuse on compliance and security, which then comes into a technology discussion, right? So you have to make sure you have some sort of manageable volumes. You have to make sure you can put policies on these volumes. You have to make sure you can do role-based access control, deep, granular role-based access control in easy way. And that's how you define your ownership policy. And a lot of customers do that today, where they say, even business users get their own little volume. They don't even know it's a volume. They just get their own directory. And they get quotas, and they get permissions, and they can go query through visualization tools. But if they try to query something that they're not allowed to access, they get a notification, and then they can go talk to their IT and say, I think I deserve to know the data. I need to know.
So IT is all about standards, yeah. I mean, we create standards to make life easy, we create standards to make life difficult, right? And managing data is, you know, like we create disciplines. In project management, we have PMBOK. In data management, we have PMBOK, data management book of knowledge, right? What is your experience in institutional data management, more specifically towards the cloud, that those kind of standards have been successful or not successful?
So in my experience, as financial services folks are starting to use Hadoop, like obviously they need data in the cluster to PCI, right? Like that needs to be there. For healthcare guys, it has to be HIPAA compliant, and like either the distribution you get from the vendor, from an access perspective, like you have to abide by those standards. If they don't kind of pass through those checklists, they cannot make it available to the business units. So a lot of work, at least at like a company at Cloudera, which and I am working with financial services customers to empower them to enable all these compliance policies are working for the Hadoop cluster before they open it up to them.
Response or any comments?
So I would differentiate between compliance and standards. Okay. Obviously, compliance is the business world in which we work in, and depending on what industry you're in, you have to be in compliance. But in the big data world, at least where we are today, I think standards are the anti-analytics. Right? And forcing people to use a certain tool or a certain approach is exactly what we do not want to do. I mean, in the world of analytics, it's really wild west of it, where you're letting people use their creative juices, using whatever tools they feel comfortable with to tease insights out of the data, insights about their customers, their products, their operations, their stores, sort of whatever your strategic nouns are in your business. So, from a compliance perspective, by golly, yes, you have to make sure you stay in compliance for your industry, for your company. But from a standards perspective, I don't think we're at a point where we want to impose standards on potentially the most creative part of our organization.
So I'm going to pick up the standard, backstand for this. It's always security. The problem is that when you get into cloud and you're doing data management and you're doing multi-tenancy, you have the right securities. And then the question is whether you're in public cloud or private cloud. If you're in public cloud, that's a really bigger discussion. So you really have to think about how you're going to do this. It's not an easy answer. And it starts with understanding your data, it starts with what data is open to everybody, what data is closed, how are you going to close it, how are you going to put restrictions on it. And those standards, I mean, standards are there, people know what to do to solve these things, but you have to go to the cloud provider, you have to figure out, does this cloud provider allow me to do this? Does it allow me to do authorization? Okay, it allows me to do authorization. Does it allow me to do access control? Yes. Is this access control one and all? Like for example on S3, if you use Amazon S3 as a store, right? You have to ask that question and figure out what are the security capabilities of S3 and do they match with your compliance needs? And if not, then is there an alternative? Right? So you have to go through that in a very thoughtful checklist way to make sure. And there are people who are doing this, and there are a lot of emerging standards that are coming out, but it's clearly not a solved problem.
I'll just add one more point to that question. In addition to like audit and access and compliance, I think another big requirement I'm seeing from financial services is all about lineage, right? Especially if you're doing like risk analysis on Hadoop, you have to kind of show how you're at the calculation. Just because you threw data into Hadoop, they got this result, the SEC guys are not abiding, right? So they have to know exactly the steps you went through. And it might be difficult to just do that in the public cloud, right? Because you have to do the instrumentation at the cluster level, the node level, to really extract that information, to figure out what kind of transformation you went through. Because the ensuing transformation can happen through any end client sort of end client tool, whether it's BI tools or straight up applications. So lineage becomes a very important piece as part of the transformation.
What I find interesting about that statement is that the disciplines around data governance and master data management, which tends to get ignored in the big data discussion, comes back, right? Those are skills and competencies that organizations, big data doesn't make those go away. In fact, big data highlights the importance of data governance and master data management, just because of the example you gave there.
So I think that I'll open up for the audience, and before I open up for the audience, you have to have their questions that would have stimulated out of this discussion. What kind of skills are needed to identify, big data sources and or value propositions for big data? Or is it too big of a question?
I'm not sure I follow the question, sorry.
So we need to, when we are creating value statements for our business partners, we basically talk about the process, we talk about the technology, and we talk about the people. So what kind of skill sets? I know there's a lot of students in our in our audience also that would like to know, what kind of skill sets are needed with them to take a role in this new environment.
So what we tell organizations is that you do not need a big data strategy. You need a business strategy that incorporates big data.
Right.
And sometimes the most important person in that process is the MBA, right? Somebody has an understanding of the business, understands the kinds of questions they're trying to ask, and the decision they're trying to make. Now there's been a marvelous explosion of new technologies and skills required. The Hadoop, MapReduce, all the MapR, and the Cloudera, and we're seeing, Mahout. It's great technologies out there, but just the role of an MBA type of a person is really important, because at the end of the day, the technology may be interesting, but the technology is only a business enablement.
Yeah, so I think the way I would kind of look at it is that the technology is the easy part, right? Like you'll be able to sort of figure out the technology, and Hadoop vendors are making it so much easier to stand up a Hadoop cluster and use it. The key is framing the question, right? How do you sort of frame the question? Because even if you do all the analytics, the last mile is human, right? Somebody needs to interpret the result and say if this makes sense or not. So having that said, the savviness of business skills, interpreting the insight, having the domain expertise really helps. Because now you can connect the dots, and at the end of the day, you need to create a story. Right? From the data, getting the insight, what story, and that's how we can have meaningful impact.
I'll add one thing to it. I think based on conversations, and come circle back to the early comments that were made, right? If You start on the West Coast, you start driving down East Coast, right? The sort of understanding of what big data can accomplish sort of reduces importantly, unless you go back to the East Coast where the financial guys, they know a lot more. And why is that? I think what happens is you really need an open mind. If you were to ask me one simple sentence, and this comes from my personal journey from a person who was in networking, doing switches and routers and Wi-Fi and transition to big data. You really need to say that all the rules and learning and process and standards that I've learned to solve problems are great. I'll use them, but maybe there is a new way, right? Maybe I can ask bigger questions. Maybe if I have a business problem, I don't look at just my data. I look at other data, outside data. I bring all sorts of third-party resources in. And typically that doesn't happen in organization because like, oh, how will I get the information about all sorts of GDP across the world? Well, yes, you can. Right? It's a well-known federal websites. But not only that, there are a lot of emerging places where a lot of companies are now opening up their data for everybody else. And this is becoming a sort of new open source public asset where you can go and get all sorts of information in this world, right? You can get, for the simple ones we know, you can get Wikipedia, you can get the IMDb database for movies, but there are real serious things that are being open sourced in terms of data. So go look at that and say, how can I connect all these dots across everywhere else to gain an insight that I wouldn't if I only looked at my data, because my data is only going to talk to me about my customers, not about my prospective customers.
All right, let's see if we have audience interest in the questions. Okay, so I'll go first and then Naveen go second.
Hi, I'm Naveen Kaushik, from Big Data. I wanted to actually find out a little bit more. What I see is there's been a shift in IT, and it seems like big data is actually changing things so that now IT is not so much IT, but it's actually now incorporating business operations as part of IT. Could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, before you answer that, the mic is right up here, so if you would like to come and address from here, you're most welcome to do that.
Did you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So actually, I think you're spot on. Is that there are leading IT organizations who are seeing this as a chance to transform what they do, instead of being focused on just maintaining the computers and software and such. They're seeing themselves as business enablers. Let me give you an example. So we're doing a project for a school system in the southernmost tip of Texas. I mean, when you I get off the airplane in Texas, if I turn left, I'm in Mexico. Right? I'm not talking about drive, like I walk left, I'm in Mexico. And they want to leverage analytics and big data to create, they're calling Netflix for teachers. When a teacher walks into their computer every morning or their iPad, it tells them to make recommendations as far as intervention on students are struggling, and recommendations as far as what classes they should take, recommendations as far as how I regroup students to increase overall performance. So, and by the way, as far as leveraging data, we're bringing Zillow data in. Now, why are we bringing Zillow data? We're trying to figure out if there's an impact on pricing, the changes in the home prices on the parent support they're getting in student performance. Right? That initiative is being led by the IT organization. Right? Not the teachers. The teachers are heavily involved in this process. But it's being led by the IT groups. They see a chance to leverage all this data and all this new technology to dramatically improve the effectiveness of teachers. And, oh, by the way, because they're located in the southern part of Texas, potentially teacher retention is a huge problem. And if they can help teachers be more effective and take some of this workload off them, especially the analytic workload, of course, they're not qualified to do, they see it as a big win. So to your point, IT, smart IT organizations are saying, oh my gosh, this is a game changer in how I change my relationship with the business.
Yeah, kind of add to that is like, really data is the new gold, right? But you need to figure out, you need to mine that, you need to get to the gold. And I think there was a McKinsey report a while back that showed that companies which use data for all their analysis, they consistently outperform the S&P index, right? So there is really value in the data, you have to get insights from the data. So there's a lot of immense pressure on the IT organization because now it's a CEO mandate. Use the data, let's get insight from it. So I think the IT organizations are forced to become agile, become much more data-driven, and let's start using all these new technologies to look at what data. I think data has always existed, but people have never figured out a way to glean insights from it in an easier fashion. I think what big data, all the technologies enable now is the possibility, right? You can now do interesting, meaningful analysis on all the data that you get.
So we're walking into the realm of possibilities, and we want to see, what actionable possibilities are out there. Naveed, you wanted to ask the second question, I believe.
My name is Naveed Sinha, and I founded Double Check Consulting. I've been doing this since the 80s. So, listening to you guys this morning, it's pretty obvious that big data requires us to be open-minded, right? Just because it's a big data, that does not mean that questions asked for the small data go away. So, what questions you have asked on big data that also asked for small data, and what results are similar or different?
Yeah, so I take that one, right? So this goes back to a very interesting debate that's still going on in this world, and I think the debate will settle eventually that both are useful, right? And that's between, do I use statistics or do I use full scan rate? Which one's more important, right? So let's go back to what statistics is useful for. That's not going away. That's still useful, and you should use it. And you supplement that with things like full scan. So for example, it's good to know on average what's the customer sentiment on social websites for my brand. Okay? And how it's changing, is it within the standard deviation bounds, the standard errors, and so on and so forth. Right? And do I have to worry about it? And also logically see if I created some sort of campaigns, did they have a meaningful impact on my social strategy or personality. So that you can do with small data, and you should continue to use it. There's nothing wrong with it. But now let's turn that around and say, okay, let's say I'm a credit card company, right? And my customer just called me, my service center was frustrated, posted something on Twitter. Now, in statistics, it's going to capture that as a negative data point. But if I want to do an action on that in a real-time predictive, persuasive analytics kind of fashion, I want to say, let's correlate. This is this guy's credit card profile, these are the transactions and all this. This is my customer 360 for this customer. This is my customer sentiment on average. He just posted something on Twitter after this specific customer service call. What can I do right now? Because he's going to go away. He's going to go call another credit card, go from a credit card, and I lost that customer, right? You can't do that with smart data. You have to do that with big data. So you have to marry both of these to achieve both your businesses.
And I think the small data question is a great place to start. And let me give you an example. I was dealing with the vice president of marketing at a company, and I kind of was on the wrong end of this conversation. She was a bit upset. She said, I have to answer a very simple question. Who's my most important customer? Okay? She goes, no, she said, 10 years ago that was really easy. I took my sales file, I downloaded it to Excel. I sorted these in order, first to the top one. That's the most important customer. Then she said about 5 years ago, he said, no, wait, it's not the person who buys the most, the person who's the most profitable. She said, now I got to bring in returns, payments, cost of product margin, and all this other data to calculate who's my most profitable customer. She said, finally I got that done. Then along you say, oh wait, no. It's not your most important. Your most important customer is your largest customer. And it's not your most profitable customer, but it might very well be your most influential customer. She says, when is this going to stop? Right? When is this going to stop? Right? So, like I said, wrong end of the conversation, but your point here is that your point was, this question first started off small and simple. And the big data available made that same question, but the answer changed dramatically. Now the most important person was the person who had a huge network of friends who were most profitable and buying the right kind of products and the right kinds of promotions, right? All the different KPIs against which you now determine most profitable. So I think that small question, there's a lot of gold in that small question. Organizations know the small questions. Our job is to help them figure out how to get them different answers. Something that's more actionable.
I think the job is to make solve a bunch of small questions and look at systems biology, so as to speak, right, at a big level. Because you should be open-minded and also willing to accept that some places machine learning algorithms give you wrong answers, just to give you the right answer. You know, for example, brain tumor cancer and things like that are down. Especially then in healthcare fraud, small questions, you know, a bunch of small questions don't make it big questions. It's still small data, big questions. You know, so it's all about openness, how you look at the question and how you arrive at the answers.
Thank you very much for the question. Any last question? Please.
Specifically when it relates to deploying new data in the cloud, do you see any of these Snowden, say, kind of revelations hindering folks moving into the cloud in general, specifically for big data? And if that is a concern of a company, what have ramifications or thoughts of what folks are doing to sort of shield themselves when companies like Microsoft and Google all did it, and the answer comes knocking, we're going to hand the data.
So in my experiences, I think the public cloud adoption among the mainstream enterprises, it's still very early days. Right? If you go and talk to the big financial services customers, insurance companies, healthcare companies, all of them are looking at the public cloud as a viable alternative, but they're not all in. They're trying to figure out precisely for the reason that if I put the data in there, will it be secure? Will I have compliance? Will I have audit controls, right? They have built an infrastructure for their data in-house, in-premise data centers over the last 10 years, decades, right? So they just to recreate that experience in the public cloud is going to take a while. But the public cloud guys are also moving at the same pace. Amazon recently just introduced the Gov Cloud just to address some of the concerns around the government customers, right? So it's going to be a transition. And it'll be interesting to see. And that's why we're seeing a lot of interest from the Fortune 5 companies to create private clouds because they want the public cloud agility within the data center. Right? So we'll have to see next few years how it kind of shapes out, whether it's the public cloud, private cloud, the hybrid model, where does all this settle down?
And I'll add just to this, it's just a personal opinion, don't vote against Manpower or anything. But a couple of things. Well, not necessarily the private cloud. I've seen the same thing where customers say, we're too big. We can go to private cloud and achieve efficiencies. It doesn't have to be 99% efficiency last year. We get to 95%, we're good. Right? So we'll keep our own control, we'll keep our own, we have hundreds of employees and thousands of servers. That's what we're going to do. So we've seen those guys definitely slow down and take a pause and say, maybe I'm going to wait till this whole Snowden thing gets resolved in a reasonable fashion. Okay? So, but now let's take a step back. For better or worse, we have become comfortable with our personal life being on all the social sites. We've become comfortable with sharing data that we consider private out with some restrictions, but we have become comfortable, right? And in general, the consumerization of IT trend is also happening. So there is an open question that I want to leave all of you guys with. To think in your mind, is there data in your enterprise clusters that really, given this amount of security that the public clouds have, do you really have to have it locked down? A. And B, do you actually have the security experts to lock it down as well as the public cloud guys? Right? So there are these two questions that you have to ask yourself and make a decision. I'm seeing a lot of small to mid-sized companies, not the big companies, the big companies aside, are saying, you know what? The majority of the data with the security I get on the cloud, I can make it more secure today than having it run inside my place.
Thank you very much. I know we have a lot of questions. I wanted to conclude the conversation. I will have all of the three panelists available to you for your questions after the session. This is your host, Shadar Kamal, and Fukaz Bonate. And I want to thank you, Anil Dalmar from Manpower, Mala Venkatra from Kaltara, and Bill Schwarzer from EMC to participate in this discussion. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the class.